You're in bed right now, or you will be tonight, and outside the window, it might be well below freezing. You don't feel any of it. A heater ticks somewhere in the wall, or an electric blanket is already warm before you even climb under it, and your body barely has to work at all to stay at 37 degrees. You pull the duvet up, and within minutes, you're gone. Now rewind 400,000 years. You're lying on frozen ground in what is now northern Spain, in the depths of an Ice Age winter. There is no roof, only an overhang of rock. The fire nearby has burned down to embers, and the air coming off the mountains is somewhere around minus 15 degrees. Your body still needs to do the one thing it does every single night, cool its core just enough to fall asleep. Except here, cooling down even a little more could kill you before sunrise. So the question is direct. For hundreds of thousands of years, with no heating, no insulated walls, no down duvets, how did human beings sleep through nights that could freeze a person solid? The answer doesn't begin with fire. It begins with a problem inside your own body that almost nobody thinks about. Every night, to fall asleep, your body pulls warm blood out of its core and sends it rushing to your hands and feet, opening tiny vessels called arteriovenous anastomoses so heat can radiate off your skin. Researchers at the Netherlands Institute for Brain Research, led by Eus van Someren, found that this gradient between hand and foot temperature and core temperature is one of the strongest predictors of how fast a person falls asleep. It's how your core temperature drops the degree or so your brain needs to shut off. That system is brilliant in a warm room. In an Ice Age winter, it's a design flaw. Dump heat through your skin when the air around you is already trying to kill your core temperature, and you're not falling asleep, you're bleeding warmth into the dark. And here's the part that makes it worse. Sleep physiologists studying thermoregulation, building on decades of work by the Italian researcher Pierluigi Parmigiani, found something stranger still. During REM sleep, the deepest, most restorative stage, the brain's thermostat effectively goes offline. Shivering and other automatic responses to cold are suppressed almost entirely, and body temperature starts drifting with the temperature of the room instead of being defended. For a few minutes at a time, a sleeping human becomes closer to cold-blooded than warm-blooded. The stage of sleep your ancestors needed most was also the stage where their internal furnace briefly shut down. So the very system that let you sleep, and the very stage of sleep your brain needed to survive the next day, were both working against you the entire night, which meant sleep in the cold was never going to be solved by biology alone. The first fix wasn't fire, it was thread. At Denisova Cave in Siberia, archaeologists recovered a bone-sewing needle with a drilled eye, made from bird bone and dated to roughly 50,000 years old, among the oldest needles ever found anywhere on Earth. It wasn't even made by a modern human, it was made by a Denisovan, a different, now extinct branch of the human family. Before needles like this existed, clothing was draped, a hide thrown over the shoulders, gaps everywhere for wind to find. A needle changes everything. It lets you tailor, seam skins tight against the body, close every gap where warm air could escape. Archaeologist Ian Gilligan at the University of Sydney has argued that this leap from draped hides to fitted, sewn, cold-weather clothing may be one of the reasons Homo sapiens went on to spread through Ice Age Eurasia, while Neanderthal populations in those same cold regions eventually did not survive. At the burial site of Sungir in Russia, dated to roughly 34,000 years ago, archaeologists found thousands of mammoth ivory beads arranged on the skeletons, in the exact pattern they'd fall into if sewn onto trousers, sleeves, and hooded jackets, fitted, layered, built for a body that had to sleep through brutal winter nights and wake up alive. But clothing worn during the day doesn't answer what happens once you lie down. Sleeping bodies stop moving, stop generating the heat that walking or working produces, and press directly against whatever is beneath them. Ground that has been losing heat all night is not your friend. So your ancestors built a barrier between themselves and it, thick layers of fur and hide, sometimes stuffed with dried moss or grass for trapped air, the same insulating principle warm climates use to block heat from entering, now flipped to keep heat from leaving. The physics didn't change. The direction did. Here's the part almost nobody talks about. Somewhere between roughly 18,000 and 15,000 years ago, on the open, treeless plains of what is now Mazyrik, Ukraine, people did something that sounds almost impossible until you see the archaeology. They built houses out of mammoth bones. Skulls, jaws, and tusks stacked and interlocked into a circular dome-like frame, then almost certainly covered in hides. Excavators uncovered 4 of these structures clustered together, built from several hundred bones and tusks in total, each with a hearth near its center. On a landscape with almost no trees, bone, and packed earth did the job wood does everywhere else, structural material that also blocked wind and held warmth. This wasn't a shelter thrown together to survive one storm. Some of these structures show signs of use across generations, a piece of cold weather engineering people kept coming back to, winter after winter. Half a world away, and thousands of years later, in early Korea, people cut heated air right through their floors. Archaeological remains trace a system called ondol back to roughly the Bronze Age, around 1000 BCE, and by the Goryeo period, over 1,000 years ago, it had grown into full-room underfloor heating. Smoke and hot air from a cooking hearth were channeled through stone flues running beneath the living space before venting out the other side, warming the floor itself so sleepers lying directly on it stayed warm from below all night, long after the fire had burned low. No modern insulation, just moving heat exactly where sleeping bodies needed it most. And when architecture and clothing still weren't enough, your ancestors turned to something they could not build: time and each other. A 2015 study published in Current Biology by Gandhi Yetish, Jerome Siegel, and colleagues tracking 3 modern hunter-gatherer and hunter-horticulturalist groups whose lives mirror ancestral conditions, found that people slept roughly an hour longer per night in winter than in summer. The body wasn't fighting the cold night. It was surrendering more of it to rest, conserving energy instead of burning it moving around in the dark. And they almost never slept alone. Ethnographic records from cold climate hunter-gatherer groups across Siberia, the Arctic, and subarctic North America describe entire families sleeping pressed together under shared hides, a practice that isn't about comfort. 2 or 3 bodies radiating heat into one enclosed space raise the ambient temperature measurably. It's a passive furnace made of people. Someone typically stayed close enough to the fire to wake if it dropped too low, feeding it through the night in shifts, an unspoken rotation that meant the flame and the group's core temperature rarely fell for long. There's an even stranger possibility sitting underneath all of this. In 2020, researchers Juan Luis Arzuaga and Antonis Bartziocas published a study of bones from that same Cima de los Huesos site in Spain, the pit your ancestors were shivering above at the start of this video, some more than 400,000 years old. They found seasonal lesions in the bone growth that closely resemble what's seen in modern hibernating mammals. Evidence of bone development repeatedly interrupted, consistent with the body shutting down growth to survive long stretches with almost no food. It's a genuinely disputed hypothesis, far from proven. But if even a rudimentary version of it is right, it means some of your ancestors weren't just enduring winter nights. Some of them may have been shutting large parts of their bodies down to survive whole winters at a time. Now, pull back and look at the whole system. Cold came at your ancestors with 3 weapons: a biological sleep mechanism that leaked heat by design, a stage of deep sleep that briefly disabled the body's own furnace, and a season that could last months with no reprieve. And they answered every one of them. They answered the leaking heat with tailored clothing sewn tight enough to trap what the body tried to release. They answered the ground's cold pull with layered hides and insulating fill. They answered entire winters with permanent architecture, mammoth bone dwellings on treeless plains, heated stone floors in early Korea, built to outlast a season and be used again the next. And they answered the hours no fire or hide could fully cover with each other. Bodies stacked close. Someone always half awake to feed the flame. None of it was instinct alone. It was accumulated, tested, handed down engineering against a threat that could kill a sleeping person in a single unwatched night. Tonight, when you pull the duvet up and the room is warm before you've even settled in, you're closing a loop that started with a bone needle in a Siberian cave. Your ancestors never got to stop thinking about the cold. They just built enough around themselves, thread by thread, bone by bone, body by body, that eventually you wouldn't have to.